Hello and welcome.
You have found your way here to Boring History for Sleep. A quiet place, a sanctuary from the noise and the hurry of your day. There is nothing you need to do now. Nothing to solve, nothing to plan. You have given yourself this time, and this time is for rest. So I invite you to settle in. Let your body grow heavy. Feel the support of the mattress beneath you, the comfort of the blankets around you. Take a slow, deep breath. And as you exhale, feel the tension of the day beginning to unspool, letting go, piece by piece. Tonight, we are going on a long journey together. A journey not of grand battles or dramatic discoveries, but of the quiet, persistent pulse of life itself. We will travel across time, bearing witness to the simple, profound act of human endurance. Our journey begins in the deepest, darkest cold of a medieval winter. We will feel the bite of the frost and the sting of the smoke, and we will learn how the everyday heroes of the past survived the long, brutal nights. From there, our path will lead us into the gilded, dangerous halls of the Tudor court, where ambition and desire created a storm that would reshape a kingdom, and where a brilliant, tragic queen would play a game for the highest stakes of all. Then we will cross the wide, dark ocean to a new world, to a harbor filled with defiance, where the simple act of destroying crates of tea lit a spark that would ignite a revolution. And finally, we will drift further back, further than all the others, to the silent, sun-baked desert of Peru. There, we will walk the empty plazas of a lost city, a civilization built on peace and harmony, a mystery swallowed by the sands of time. These are the stories of survival, of ambition, of defiance, and of peace. But these are just stories now. Their struggles are long over. Their urgency has faded. They are just whispers, carried on a gentle breeze, designed to guide your mind away from the present and toward a place of deep, restorative sleep. Dim the lights, close your eyes, and let us begin our journey. When we allow our minds to drift back to the medieval world, what do we see? Perhaps we picture shining knights on horseback, their banners snapping in the wind. We might imagine grand, sunlit tournaments or royal feasts in great stone halls filled with music and laughter. These are the images of stories, bright, loud, and memorable. But for the vast majority of people who lived in those times, life was something else entirely. It was quieter. It was slower. It was lived much, much closer to the earth. For the average peasant, the person whose hands tilled the fields and built the walls, life was not a grand adventure. It was a cycle. It was the rhythm of the seasons, planting, growing, harvesting, and then waiting. Of all the seasons, winter was the one that cast the longest shadow. It was not just a time of year, it was an annual test of endurance. A quiet, relentless adversary that returned year after year without fail. The struggle did not begin with the first snowfall. It began in the fading light of autumn. You feel the air change. The crispness of the fall mornings gives way to a sharper, biting edge. The sun, which had been a warm companion in the fields, becomes a distant, watery disk, sinking below the horizon earlier and earlier each day. The final harvest is brought in. This is a time of profound, unspoken anxiety. The entire village community works together, their movements hurried but methodical. Every sheaf of grain, every root vegetable is precious. And in the quiet moments, the question hangs in the air. Is it enough? Will this store of grain, drying in the rafters, last until the first thaw? Will the salted meat and the dried beans, stored carefully in clay pots, see the family through the long, dark, hungry months? There is no guarantee. As the ground hardens from pliable earth to iron-hard frost, a change comes over the land. The sounds of summer, the shouting in the fields, the distant ring of the blacksmith's hammer, the laughter of children playing by the stream, all of it fades. The world is muffled. It is replaced by the new sounds of winter, the constant, low moan of the wind, the sharp, sudden crack of timber freezing in the forest, and the deep, abiding quiet of a world holding its breath, waiting. For the peasant, winter was not about living. It was about surviving. It was a quiet, daily question. How do we not die tonight? How do we keep the children from freezing? How do we make the food last? The cold was not merely an inconvenience. It was a predator. Frostbite, hypothermia, these were not abstract medical terms. They were a daily, tangible reality. The constant, looming risk of simply not waking up. Every single morning that a family stirred in the smoky darkness of their hut, every morning they counted each other, and all were still breathing. That was a victory. It was a minor miracle, worth a moment of gratitude, perhaps celebrated with a breakfast of dark, heavy bread, or a warm turnip pulled from the embers of the hearth. Surviving a medieval winter was not about finding comfort. Comfort was a luxury so distant it was not even a concept. It was about gritting your teeth. It was about piling on every piece of rough cloth you owned. It was about huddling with your family, your neighbors, and even your livestock, and praying that you would see the sun rise one more time. The world, which in summer had been as wide as the fields, now shrank, pulling inwards to the one fragile place that offered any hope of shelter, the small, smoky, drafty hut they called home. If you feel a draft in your modern home, perhaps from a window that doesn't seal quite perfectly, imagine for a moment the home of the medieval peasant. Their homes were not just drafty. As historians have noted, they were essentially enthusiastic wind tunnels with a roof built from the very earth they stood upon. Most were constructed using a method we call wattle and daub. Imagine the process. First, a sturdy, rough-hewn timber frame is raised. Then, between the main posts, a lattice of thin, flexible sticks like hazel or willow is woven. This is the wattle. It looks like a giant, flat basket with 1,000 small gaps and openings. This woven wattle wall is then daubed. This daub was a thick, sticky plaster, a practical recipe of whatever the land offered. It was a mixture of wet clay, straw or animal hair to act as a binder, and animal dung. The dung was not a sign of uncleanliness. It was a crucial, valuable ingredient. It was cheap, readily available, fibrous, and sticky, an excellent insulator and binder that helped the daub cling to the wattle. The whole family might be involved in this, slapping this cold, wet mixture onto the woven walls, pushing it into every crack, smoothing it with their hands or simple wooden tools. But no matter how lovingly this daub was smeared, it was a constant battle against the elements. The mixture would dry and crack. Small pieces would fall out. The wind, the cold winter wind, was a living, insidious thing. It found every tiny crack, every new gap, and it whistled and shrieked its way into the one-room home. It swirled around the floor, a constant, moving river of cold air, ensuring that no one ever got too comfortable. And then there was the roof. Thatched roofs, woven from bundles of reeds or straw, looked charming and picturesque in our storybooks. The reality was different. After months of heavy rain and snow, the thatch would become waterlogged, heavy, and compressed. It would sag and it would leak. A persistent drip, drip, drip into a wooden bucket or onto the compacted earth floor was the constant soundtrack to many winter nights. Windows, if they existed at all, were not made of glass. Glass was a luxury more precious than jewels. A peasant's window was often just a small square hole cut into the daub, which could be stuffed with a bundle of rags or straw at night. If you were more fortunate, you might have a simple wooden shutter, or perhaps a piece of thin animal hide, scraped and oiled until it was translucent, allowing a pale, milky, grim light to filter through, but doing very little to stop the cold. And finally, there was the floor beneath your feet. It was not wood, it was not stone. It was simply the earth itself, packed down hard by years of walking, sleeping, and living. When the rain and snow were heavy, moisture would seep up from the ground, turning the floor into a cold, muddy, slippery mess. In the depths of winter, every step inside your own home could feel like trudging across a frozen marsh. Cold from the leaking roof above, cold from the damp earth below, and cold from the wind that sliced through the walls from every side. It was a three-dimensional assault on the body's precious, hoarded heat. But they fought back. They were not passive victims. They packed the gaps in the walls with moss and handfuls of dried grass. They jammed old, greasy rags into the worst of the drafts. They were stubborn, they were creative, and they refused to give in. If the peasant's home had a single beating heart, it was the hearth. In the very center of this small, one-room hut, there was a fire. We must be very clear about what this was. It was not a cozy, brick-lined fireplace set neatly into a wall. It was not a grand stone mantel where a family might gather. And most importantly, in the vast majority of peasant homes, there was no chimney. A chimney was a complex, expensive piece of architecture. The peasant's hearth was far simpler. It was a shallow pit dug into the center of the earth floor, or perhaps a flat, circular arrangement of stones. Here, a small, stubborn, precious fire would be kept alive. The fuel was whatever could be gathered: sticks, branches, peat if you lived near a bog, or, if you were lucky, a precious, seasoned log of dry wood which burned slower and hotter. And with no chimney, the smoke did its best. It billowed upwards, thick and gray, into the dark, vaulted space of the rafters. It hung in the air, a constant, hazy cloud. It looked for any escape it could find, Perhaps a small, purpose-built hole in the thatch, or the gaps in the roof, or the cracks in the very walls it was meant to be warming. Often, the easiest path for the smoke was to simply hang in the air, filling the small room with a constant, acrid sting. Imagine the atmosphere inside. Your eyes would water. Your lungs would feel the rasp of the smoke. Over time, everything, your clothes, your hair, your skin, the very walls, would be coated in a thin, greasy layer of black soot. It was not ideal for breathing. It was not ideal for one's long-term health. But this constant, choking smoke had its own grim advantages. It did a great, if unintentional, job of fumigating the thatch, driving out fleas, lice, and other unwanted biting guests. The hearth was the center of this small universe. It was not just for warmth. It was the kitchen. A single iron pot, perhaps the most valuable object the family owned, would hang over the flames. In it, a thin soup, a pottage of oats, turnips, and onions might bubble all day, providing a meager, warm substance. It was the only source of light. In the crushing, absolute darkness of a winter night, that one small, flickering fire was the only thing that held the blackness at bay. And, as we've noted, it was the medieval version of a television. After the sun went down, there was nothing else to do. The family would huddle around it, their faces lit by the orange glow. They would mend their simple tools. They would spin wool. They would tell stories, passing down family and village history. Or they would simply sit and stare into the flames, finding comfort in the movement and the light. This fire was the fragile line between life and death. Keeping it alive wasn't just a nice idea. It was a mandatory, daily, hourly chore. Letting the fire die out at night was like putting up a sign, an invitation for the cold to come in and finish you off. It was a smoky, sputtering, often disappointing little fire. But in the depths of a medieval winter, it was the stubborn, beating heart of hope. If there was one single fear that dominated the winter night, it was this: letting the fire go out. Without that warm, flickering, smoky lifeline, the biting, invasive cold would creep in faster than a tax collector after the harvest. And in the dead of winter, restarting a fire from scratch was not just an inconvenience. It was a desperate, difficult, and potentially deadly affair. Matches, of course, did not exist. Lighters were the stuff of pure fantasy. Rekindling a fire meant starting from zero. Imagine the scene. It is 4 o'clock in the morning. The hut is pitch black and so cold you can see your breath hanging in a cloud in front of your face. Your fingers are numb, stiff, and clumsy. You must take your piece of flint and your small piece of steel and strike them together, over and over and over, hoping to shave off a single precious spark. You must then guide that spark onto a tiny, delicate piece of tinder, a bit of dried fungus or linen charcloth. You hold your breath, you blow gently, trying to coax that tiny spark into a fragile, glowing ember. Every failed attempt, every spark that dies in the cold, is a small, cold stab of panic. Now add to this a hungry baby crying, or a wolf howling in the distant frozen woods. So peasants became very, very smart about their fire. They learned the crucial nightly ritual of banking the embers. This was not a financial term. It was a technique of preservation, a domestic art passed down from parent to child. Just before the family settled down into their communal huddle for the night, the last person awake, perhaps the mother or a grandparent, would perform this ritual. They would carefully sift through the ashes of the hearth. They would find the best, most vibrant, glowing red embers. Then, they would gently, carefully bury these embers under a thick mound of gray, insulating ash. The ash acted like a perfect fitted blanket. It insulated the glowing coals from the air. It starved them of just enough oxygen so they wouldn't burn out, but not so much oxygen that they would die completely. It held them in a state of suspended animation, smoldering, waiting, just barely alive through the long, cold hours of the night. If you did the ritual correctly, you could stroll over at sunrise, poke the cold, dead-looking pile of gray ash with a stick, and reveal a beautiful, winking, red-hot coal. You would add a handful of dry kindling, you would blow gently, and voila! The fire would be reborn, without the panic, without the frostbitten fingers. But if you did it wrong, if you packed the ash too tight and smothered the coals, or if you packed it too loosely and they burned themselves out, or if a stray, vicious draft found its way in and killed them, well, the morning got a whole lot colder and a whole lot more desperate. This was an art form. Everyone had their own secrets. Some insisted on using only the driest ash. Others swore that a little bit of dampness was key to slowing the burn. Sometimes, even the best technique wasn't enough. A howling wind might find a new crack in the daub. That's why some families took turns, establishing a fire watch, one person forcing themselves to get up in the freezing dark just to check the coals, to nudge them, to keep them alive. It was the medieval equivalent of sleepwalking to the thermostat. In the end, banking the fire was less about mastering nature and more about buying just a few more precious hours of warmth. And if you woke up to even a single surviving glowing ember, that was your victory for the day. In the stark, cold arithmetic of a medieval winter, when the fire was banked low and the wind was a hungry wolf at the walls, there was one other reliable source of warmth: each other. On the coldest nights, the phrase, "the more the merrier," was not a social nicety. It was a literal, strategic survival tactic. The goal, as the darkness fell, was not comfort, and it was certainly not privacy. Privacy, as we understand it, a personal room, a private space, was a concept so foreign, so luxurious, it would not even have been understood. The singular driving goal of the night was simple: do not wake up frozen to the floor. To achieve this, the entire household, everyone, would pile into the warmest corner of the hut. This was usually the spot furthest from the drafty, ill-fitting door and closest to the residual, radiating warmth of the banked hearth. They would wrap themselves in whatever they had. Every scrap of cloth, every old cloak, every piece of animal pelt was thrown onto the pile. And then they would form what can only be described as a desperate, snoring human huddle. There was an unspoken geography to this sleeping arrangement. The younger children, the most vulnerable, were squeezed into the very middle between their parents, where they were safest from the cold and surrounded by body heat. Grandparents, the frail and the elderly, would be snuggled in next to them. The strongest, warmest adults would often sleep on the outer edges. This wasn't bad luck. It was strategic. They acted as a living human shield, a barrier against the drafts that snaked across the floor. If you were lucky, you slept in the middle, where body heat radiated from all sides. This was the prime real estate. If you were unlucky, or if it was your turn, you were on the edge. This was the medieval equivalent of sleeping with your face pressed against the open door of a meat locker.
Woe to the person who tossed and turned.
If you shifted just once to get comfortable, you might accidentally knock your aunt or your uncle into the freezing draft by the wall. You were now the family villain. Often, the bedding itself was communal. A single large mattress, which, as we know, was really just a rough, lumpy sack filled with straw, would lie on the floor. It would slowly, miserably flatten under the nightly weight of multiple generations. And because hygiene, washing, was not a priority or even a possibility in the dead of winter, let's just say it was not the most fragrant sleeping arrangement. The air would be thick with the smell of smoke, damp wool, and unwashed bodies. But when the alternative is hypothermia, when the alternative is frostbite, you stop being picky. This sharing of body heat was not just a cozy incidental thing, it was a core strategy. And in those long, dark, cold hours, huddled together, this was when the family bonded. This was when stories were told in hushed voices. This was when songs were quietly sung. This was when the children listened to the elders, and the fabric of the family and the village was woven tightly together, literally in the dark. So, the next time your partner steals the blankets or the dog hogs the bed, just remember, at least you are not fighting for elbow space with a snoring uncle and a particularly judgmental goat. If you thought modern roommates were a challenge, the medieval peasant would like to introduce you to their winter housemates. The cows, the goats, the pigs, and the chickens. During the harshest nights of winter, bringing the livestock inside the one-room hut was not a quirky tradition. It was not a sign of sentimentality. It was a vital, non-negotiable strategy for survival. There were two very simple, very practical reasons for this. The first and most important was warmth. A cow is a large, four-legged walking furnace. Its massive body and slow, ruminating digestion generate an incredible amount of heat. In a small, poorly insulated hut, bringing one or two cows inside could genuinely raise the ambient temperature by several precious degrees. A goat, a pig, they all added their own small measure of warmth. The second reason was security. In a world with very little, your animals, your cow, your goats were your most valuable, essential worldly possessions. They were your source of milk, your source of cheese. They were your plows. They were your future. Leaving these precious assets outside in a flimsy pen in the dark of a blizzard was risking them to the elements, or worse, to a hungry wolf or a desperate hungry neighbor. So, at night, the one-room peasant home became a chaotic, living, breathing furnace. The chickens would find a place to roost, perhaps in the smoky rafters above or in an old basket in the corner. The pigs, not caring much for social graces, would snort and settle near the hearth, plopping down wherever they pleased, probably right in the middle of the floor. And the cows, the largest and warmest of the roommates, would lounge against the daub walls, chewing their cud with a slow, rhythmic grinding motion, looking as though they paid rent. It was not glamorous. Far from it. The smells were legendary. Imagine, if you will, the thick, earthy animal musk, the pungent aroma of damp straw, the ammonia, all mixing with the ever-present acrid wood smoke in a small, unventilated room. By the time spring arrived, the perfume of a shared winter was something fierce. But medieval peasants developed a selective sense of smell. They didn't complain. They understood with a deep, practical wisdom one uncomfortable truth. The more animals you had inside, the fewer frozen toes you would have in the morning. Of course, sharing your bedroom with a farm was not without its hazards. Imagine drifting off into a rare, peaceful sleep, only to be rudely awakened by a chicken deciding that your hair makes an excellent new perch. Or imagine waking in the dark and placing your bare feet onto the cold earth floor, only to step not on the cold earth, but on something suspicious and warm and very, very soft. Yes, medieval mornings were full of surprises. But despite the noise, despite the smells, and despite the occasional hoof to the ribs in the middle of the night, the peasants understood the simple math. Cold kills, and a cow provides warmth. In the long, freezing, desperate battle against the winter, a warm, slightly slobbery cow's breath was often the deciding factor between life and death. In the depths of a medieval winter, fashion was not a concept. Fashion was not about looking good. It was, quite simply, about not dying. Peasants were not flipping through the latest trends from Paris or Milan. They were layering, piling on cloth as if they were preparing for a personal battle against the Grim Reaper himself. The rule was simple. If you owned it, you wore it. Sometimes you wore it all at once. Let us build this outfit layer by layer from the inside out. The first layer against the skin would be a basic undertunic. It was likely made of rough, scratchy, unbleached linen. It was probably not very clean. Over that, you would wear a thicker woolen tunic. Wool was the miracle fabric of the medieval age. It is itchy, yes. It is heavy, but it has a magical property. It retains a significant amount of its insulating warmth even when it gets damp. And in a world of leaking roofs and damp-seeping floors, you were always damp. If you were fortunate, you owned a second woolen tunic, which you would wear on top of the first. Then, add to this some rough-spun leggings or hose that likely sagged at the knees and were tied to a belt. Over this entire assembly, you would drape a heavy, thick wool cloak. And if you were truly lucky, if you had status in your village, you might have a patched-up sheepskin with the wool still on to throw over the top like a prized trophy. Boots, sturdy leather boots, were a profound luxury. Many peasants simply wrapped their feet in layers of cloth, old greasy rags, and then stuffed them into simple wooden clogs or shoes with leather soles and cloth uppers. If the cold still bit through, you just added another rag, and you truly hoped, that you wouldn't lose a toe to frostbite. And now, we must address the issue of washing these layers. Washing your clothes in the middle of winter was, quite simply, a fool's errand. It was dangerous. It meant trekking through the snow to a frozen stream or well. It meant smashing a hole in the ice. It meant plunging your hands into water so cold it felt like fire. And then you would have to wait 2, 3, perhaps 4 days for your only set of clothes to dry in the smoky, frigid, damp air of your hut. All the while, you would have nothing. Most peasants, wisely, decided that smelling like a combination of smoke, sweat, unwashed bodies, and goat was a very, very small price to pay for not freezing solid. Interestingly, this lack of washing had an unintended bonus feature: insulation. As the days and weeks of winter wore on, the layers of clothing would become saturated. Grime, natural body oils, soot from the fire, and good old-fashioned mud, all of it would build up on the fabric. This natural, greasy, grimy armor, this holy filth, as some called it, would clog the tiny gaps in the fabric's weave. It made the clothes more wind-resistant and better at trapping the body's precious heat. It was, in effect, a medieval high-tech jacket, just much, much smellier. And finally, where did this layered person sleep? We have mentioned the bed. It was not a bed as we know it. It was, if you were lucky, a rough wooden frame. On this frame, you would place a large sack, a pallias, and you would stuff it full of whatever you could get: straw, hay, or old dried rushes from the riverbank. That's it. No memory foam, no orthopedic support, no five-star hotel experience. Just a crunchy, lumpy, slightly pokey mess that smelled faintly of barnyard and regret. Every toss and turn in the night brought a delightful, crinkling, rustling soundtrack. This straw mattress wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a temporary ecosystem. Over time, the straw would flatten, grow moldy from the damp, and attract a whole host of bedfellows. Fleas, lice, and other charming critters loved straw bedding almost as much as the peasants did. But as humble, as infested, as uncomfortable as these beds were, they were lifesavers. That thick pile of straw, that island of dried plants on the floor, provided one final, crucial insulating layer, separating the sleeping, huddling bodies from the frozen, heat-sucking, damp earth below. It was one more small, ingenious barrier in the long, cold, desperate war against the night. Let us very gently leave the smoky, crowded, earth-floored hut of the medieval peasant. Let the image of the human huddle, the smell of damp wool and livestock, fade into the mists of the past. Our journey now carries us forward in time, forward by several hundred years to the early 16th century. The world is changing. The grip of winter is still harsh, but for some, the rules of life are different. For the fortunate, life is no longer just a simple, brutal struggle against the elements. It is a new kind of struggle, a struggle for power, for status, for influence, a new, more subtle, and, in its own way, more dangerous game. We find ourselves in England, not in a mud and wattle village, but within the cold, strong, imposing stone walls of a place like Blickling Hall or Hever Castle. Here, around the year 1501, a child was born who would, unlike the nameless peasants we have just left, leave a brilliant, fiery, and indelible mark on history. Her name was Anne Boleyn. She did not come into the world with a crown on her head or armies at her feet. In the grand, rigid, layered hierarchy of Tudor society, Anne's birth barely stirred a ripple. She was simply the daughter of Thomas Boleyn, Thomas Boleyn was a man of noble blood, yes, but more importantly, he was a man of deep, restless, and driving ambition. He was a diplomat, a courtier, a man who understood the shifting, treacherous currents of power. He saw the world as a ladder to be climbed. Anne's mother, Elizabeth Howard, also came from one of the most powerful noble families in the land. From these modest, though well-connected beginnings, something extraordinary was taking root. A life that would one day, through sheer force of will, tilt the entire course of English history. While the peasant's life was a daily struggle against the cold, Anne's life would be a struggle against the intricate, unwritten, and unforgiving rules of the royal court. The cold she would one day face was not that of the wind, but of political disfavor. The survival she would fight for was not for warmth, but for status, for influence, and ultimately for her life. The game was different. The stakes were just as high. And for Anne, that game began not in England, but in the glittering, sophisticated, and polished courts of mainland Europe. From a very early age, Anne Boleyn was set apart, not by her family's great wealth, but by her mind. She was clever, she was spirited, and, by all accounts, she was magnetic. Her ambitious father, Thomas, recognized this potential in his young daughter. She was not just a girl to be married off. She was an asset to be polished, a tool to be sharpened. And so he sent her abroad, to the continent, to receive an education that few English girls of her time could even dream of. First, she served as a maid of honor to Margaret of Austria in the glittering formal court of the Netherlands. Here, in a world of complex European alliances and subtle diplomatic dances, Anne, still just a young girl, absorbed the art of politics. She learned refined manners. She learned how to watch, how to listen, and how to navigate a world where a single whispered word could build a fortune or end a life. But it was in France that Anne's brilliance was truly polished to a hard, captivating, dangerous shine. She spent years in the sophisticated, cultured, and dazzling courts of Queen Claude and Queen Marguerite of Navarre. This was the epicenter of Renaissance culture. While other young noble women of her station back in England were perfecting their embroidery, their posture, and their quiet obedience, Anne was mastering other arts. She mastered the art of conversation, the art of intrigue, the art of fashion, of elegance, of flirtation, and of devastating, intelligent wit. She learned the language of influence. She learned how to command the attention of a room, not with loudness, but with charm, without ever seeming to seek it. She read books. She debated ideas. She absorbed the music, the art, the poetry, and the effortless sophistication of the French. By the time she returned to England, in the early 1520s, Anne was something rare, and to the English court, something foreign. She was not a classic, demure English beauty. The standard of beauty at the time was pale, blonde, blue-eyed, and placid. Anne was the very opposite. She was arresting. She had thick, dark hair. She had dark, sparkling eyes that flashed with intelligence and purpose. She had a quick, musical voice and a way of moving, a way of holding herself that suggested a will and a mind just barely concealed beneath the layers of courtly grace. Anne Boleyn did not just enter a room, she changed its gravity. At a time when a woman's fate was almost always sealed by birth and by the marriage her father arranged for her, Anne refused to drift quietly into an arranged, obscure marriage. She had seen the power that charm and intellect could wield in the courts of Europe,
and she fully intended to use that knowledge at home.
She was no longer just Thomas Boleyn's daughter. She was a player in a much larger game. When Anne Boleyn arrived at the English court, she was unlike anyone the Tudor nobility had ever seen. In a world filled with pale-faced, modest, and obedient English roses, Anne was a sudden electric presence, unpredictable, unconventional, and impossible to ignore. Her dark hair, her bold eyes, and her quick, sharp, French-polished wit set her apart from the gentle, quiet ladies who filled the court of King Henry VIII. At first, she played the role that was expected of her. She took her place as a maid of honor to the Queen, the devout, beloved, and respected Queen Catherine of Aragon. But even in the Queen's shadow, Anne's presence flickered like a candle too bright to snuff out. She danced with a continental grace that others lacked. She spoke French with the ease of a native. She laughed with a confidence, a self-possession that few women of the court dared to display. Men noticed. Women gossiped. The court began to buzz, quietly, about the striking, different Boleyn girl. It was not long at all, before she caught the most dangerous and the most valuable attention of all. The attention of the king himself. Henry VIII was no stranger to flirtation. He was a man of enormous appetites, enormous charm, and an even more enormous ego. His court was his personal playground, a world of whispered promises, secret glances, and fleeting liaisons. But Anne was different. She did not swoon at his compliments. She did not blush and look away. She did not fall eagerly and gratefully into his arms, as so many others had, including, for a brief time, her own sister, Mary. Instead, Anne challenged him. She teased him. She debated with him. She matched his wit. And, most importantly, and most devastatingly, she refused him. Henry, a king, a man used to instant adoration and instant gratification, a man who had never been denied anything, was utterly captivated. The more Anne held him at arm's length, the deeper and the more obsessively he fell. Letters began to pass between them. Letters that still exist today. Letters filled with the king's declarations of love, his growing frustration, his deep, aching longing. He offered her the most powerful, unofficial position at court, the position of maîtresse en titre, the one official royal mistress. This was a position of immense wealth, power, and influence. Anne, astonishingly, said no. She would not be just another conquest. She would not be another forgotten mistress, cast aside when the king's passion cooled. Her ambition, forged in the courts of Europe, saw a much, much higher prize. It was a gamble so audacious, so breathtakingly bold, that it stunned the entire court. If Henry wanted her, truly wanted her, he would have to make her his wife. He would have to make her his queen. The king, of course, was already married. But Anne Boleyn had made her move. She had placed her bet, and she did not flinch. What began as an intense, electric flirtation between a restless king and a captivating courtier now spiraled inevitably into a national, and then international crisis. Henry VIII was not merely besotted, he was obsessed. And in his obsession, he was now willing to tear apart the very fabric of England's religious and political life, a fabric that had held for 1,000 years. The king's single-minded desire to marry Anne Boleyn hit a rather significant and immovable snag. Namely, he was already married. And not just to anyone. He was married to Queen Catherine of Aragon. Catherine was not some quiet, disposable wife. She was the daughter of the great Spanish monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella. She was the aunt of the most powerful man in Europe, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. And in England, she was beloved. She was dignified, resilient, and deeply, profoundly pious. She had been Henry's faithful, loyal wife for 2 decades. And she refused, absolutely, to quietly step aside. In the eyes of God, the English people, and all of Catholic Europe, she was the one true, rightful queen. Divorce, as we know it, was not an option. In the Catholic world, marriage was a sacrament for life. What Henry needed was an annulment, a declaration that his marriage had never been valid in the first place. But on what grounds? He seized on a desperate, convenient piece of theology. He began to argue, to convince himself, and to try to convince everyone else that his marriage to Catherine was cursed. His reasoning? Catherine had, very briefly, been married to his older brother, Arthur, before Arthur's early death many years ago. Henry now insisted that this long-ago union, which the Pope himself had granted special permission, a dispensation, to bypass, had been against God's law. He claimed it had damned his soul, and, as proof of God's displeasure, it had prevented him from having a male heir. This became known as the King's Great Matter. And for 7 long, agonizing, chaotic years, this crisis dragged on. Anne, for her part, played her role masterfully. She remained just out of Henry's reach, alternately encouraging his hopes and then maintaining her virtuous, frustrating distance. Every glance, every word, every letter was measured. The court erupted into whispers and then into open factions. Some noble families, sensing the winds of power shifting, sensing a new sun rising, eagerly courted Anne's favor. Others, the older, more conservative families, clung fiercely to Queen Catherine, horrified at the idea of this ambitious, French young woman replacing her. Henry bombarded the Pope with petitions, with threats, with legal arguments. He maneuvered his lawyers. He searched for loopholes. But the Church and the Pope would not bend. The Pope was, essentially, a prisoner of Catherine's powerful nephew, the Emperor. He could not and would not humiliate the Emperor's aunt. Henry's courtship with Anne had become something far greater than personal desire. It was now a direct challenge to the authority of the Pope, a challenge to the entire structure of the Church in England. Anne Boleyn was not just capturing a king's heart. She was, with Henry, dragging an entire, unwilling kingdom into the uncharted, dangerous, and revolutionary waters of the Reformation. There could be no turning back. After nearly 7 long, agonizing years of political maneuvering, religious scandal, and diplomatic chaos, Anne Boleyn's breathtaking, audacious gamble paid off. Henry, frustrated beyond all measure by the Pope's refusal, made a decision that would change the world. If the church in Rome would not grant him his desire, he would simply leave the church in Rome. In a series of stunning, revolutionary moves, he broke with the papacy. He declared himself the king to be the supreme head of a new independent Church of England. He had torn his kingdom away from 1,000 years of faith. In January of 1533, with Catherine of Aragon cast aside, declared no longer his wife, he and Anne were secretly married. It was a bold, desperate move, as Anne was already pregnant. By June of 1533, Anne Boleyn was given a lavish, magnificent coronation at Westminster Abbey. She was crowned Queen of England. It should have been the single greatest moment of her life, the absolute pinnacle of her ambition, the ultimate victory. But the atmosphere, even then, was far from universally joyful. The people of London, many of whom still loved and revered the devout, exiled Queen Catherine, watched Anne's coronation procession with weary, sullen, and sometimes hostile eyes. Some cheered, but many muttered prayers for their old queen, or curses for the new one. They called her the king's a heretic. Anne entered her queenship not as a beloved figure, but as a storm. She was dazzling, yes. She was provocative. She was politically savvy. She wore bold French fashions. She commanded the court with her sharp, flashing intelligence. And she made powerful, bitter enemies with breathtaking speed. Her new position, which seemed so secure, was in reality terrifyingly precarious. She knew, Henry knew, the entire world knew that everything, the king's love, the break from Rome, the anger of an entire continent, her very crown, all of it rested on one single, simple thing. She had to provide Henry with a male heir. She was not just Henry's wife anymore. She was the living, breathing justification for his entire world-shaking revolution. Early in her pregnancy, she and Henry were elated. They were certain this new, blessed, true marriage would be rewarded by God. It would be a prince. But in September of 1533, Anne gave birth. It was a healthy, beautiful, red-haired child. But it was a daughter. The child was named Elizabeth. To Anne's credit, she masked her crushing, devastating disappointment with grace. She insisted, perhaps too loudly, that the next child, the next one, would surely be a son. Henry, however, was less composed. His eyes, which had once been filled with nothing but obsessive adoration for her, now flickered, for the first unmistakable dangerous time, with the shadow of doubt. Anne Boleyn had climbed higher than almost any woman of her time. But the peak of a mountain is a cold, windy, and precarious place to stand. Almost from the moment she placed the crown on her head, the cracks in her new world began to show. At the very heart, the epicenter of all her struggles, was the relentless, crushing, and all-consuming pressure to produce a male heir. Her first child, Elizabeth, though bright and healthy, was not the son Henry had torn his kingdom apart for. The clock was ticking. Anne suffered multiple pregnancies in quick, desperate succession, but each one ended in heartbreak. She endured miscarriages. Each one was a devastating personal tragedy. But more than that, in the cold calculus of the Tudor court, each one was a political disaster. Each lost child chipped away at the very foundation of her power, at her claim to be Henry's one true, God-blessed wife. And Henry, whose passionate devotion had once been all-consuming, began to pull away. His disappointment, heavy and cold, carved a deep, chilling rift between them. He was a man who, above all else, prized obedience. He prized a quiet, soothing presence. And Anne was not, by her very nature, obedient or quiet. She argued with him. She demanded. She fought with all the fire and intelligence she possessed to keep her place, to hold his attention. But Henry grew tired. He grew tired of her sharpness, of her intellect, of her defiance. He grew tired of the very fire, the very essence that had once drawn him to her. And outside the royal chambers, her many, many enemies were gathering like wolves. The nobles who had tolerated her rise with gritted teeth now openly schemed for her downfall. The supporters of the late exiled Queen Catherine, who had died in her lonely castle, never, ever forgave Anne for what they saw as theft and heresy and sacrilege. And then, as Anne's influence began to wane, a new face appeared at court. A new star began to rise. Her name was Jane Seymour. She was one of Anne's own ladies-in-waiting, and she was everything Anne was not. She was quiet. She was demure. She was pale, gentle, and submissive. Where Anne had dazzled Henry with brilliance and challenge, Jane offered him soothing, silent, adoring compliance. It was a dangerous and ultimately fatal shift in the king's wandering attention. And Anne, perceptive and intelligent as ever, saw it happening. She saw the way the king looked at Jane. She tried, desperately, to reclaim her position. She lavished attention on Henry. She promised him more sons. She begged him for patience. But the king, restless, aging, and ever fickle, had already begun to imagine a life without the brilliant, difficult woman for whom he had once defied the entire world. Anne's political enemies, including the powerful, calculating Thomas Cromwell, the architect of the Reformation, sensed the changing tide. They sensed the king's fatigue. They sensed he wanted an exit. And quietly, patiently, they began to lay the groundwork for her destruction. The queen, who had played the game of ambition so masterfully, was now finally losing. Anne Boleyn's enemies did not attack her with armies or with swords. They came with whispers, with secrets, with suggestions, and with carefully, cruelly sharpened lies. In the back rooms of the court, betrayal was brewing, silent, patient, and deadly. Thomas Cromwell, the king's chief minister, had once been Anne's greatest ally in the break from Rome, but their alliance, built on mutual ambition, had fractured. Cromwell wanted stability, and Anne's fiery personality, her political demands, her sharp temper, had become a liability. Cromwell, sensing that Henry was now utterly enchanted by the quiet Jane Seymour and desperately wanted an exit from his marriage to Anne, offered a solution. A divorce would be humiliating. It would be an admission that this great, world-changing marriage had also been a mistake. But what if? What if Anne could be removed not by divorce, but by disgrace, by treason? The accusations they began to gather were wild. They were monstrous. And to any clear, objective eye, they were unbelievable. They accused the Queen of England of adultery with multiple men. They accused her of incest with her own brother, George Boleyn. And they accused her of conspiracy against the king's life. These charges were a grotesque, tangled web of contradictions and impossibilities. Dates were wrong, locations were impossible. But in Henry's court, in this new world of his supreme authority, the truth was whatever the king needed it to be. Several men from the court, including her brother, were arrested, taken to the Tower, and, under torture, confessed. In May of 1536, Anne herself was arrested. She was taken by royal barge down the River Thames to the Tower of London. As the great, dark stone gate, Traitor's Gate, loomed before her and slammed shut behind her, she knew she was no longer a queen. She was a prisoner. She stood trial in the great hall of the Tower, facing a tribunal of nobles, many of whom owed their titles and fortunes to her rise. Now they sat in cold, watchful judgment. Anne defended herself. She defended herself with the same fire, the same intelligence, the same piercing logic that had once won a king's heart. She denied every single accusation with a precision and an unwavering composure that astonished and even shamed her enemies. But it was all for nothing. The trial was a spectacle. It was a grim political performance designed to give the king exactly what he wanted, a legal reason to discard her. The verdict had been decided long before she ever set foot in the courtroom. She was found guilty. Her brother and the other men were sentenced to death. Anne was sentenced to be executed. In her final days, in her cold stone cell, she was reported to be calm, even serene. She spent hours in prayer. She confessed to no crimes because she insisted she had committed none. She joked with a dark, sharp humor to her ladies that she would be famous in history as a queen who had lost her head. Henry, in a final, bizarre, and chilling flicker of royal kindness, arranged for a professional executioner, a skilled swordsman, to be brought over from Calais in France. A sword, it was said, was faster, cleaner, and more merciful than the common, brutal executioner's axe. On the morning of May 19th, 1536, Anne Boleyn ascended a scaffold built specially and privately within the tower's walls. She stood tall, her face pale but calm. There were no hysterics, no broken sobs, no pleas for mercy. She spoke briefly, carefully choosing her final words. She did not accuse. She did not defend herself. She simply prayed for the king, the very man who had abandoned her, and she asked for the people to pray for her. She knelt upright in the French fashion. The swordsman, to distract her, supposedly called out for his sword, and as she turned her head, it flashed once. Silent, swift. Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, was no more. She was buried quickly, without ceremony, in an unmarked grave. in an old leftover arrow chest because no proper coffin had been prepared for her. It was a complete and total erasure. Or so it seemed. Henry married Jane Seymour just days later. But Anne's story, her true legacy, did not end in that cold, unmarked grave. Her greatest legacy was the one Henry had dismissed, the one he saw as a failure. Her daughter, Elizabeth, the child whose birth had been such a bitter disappointment, would one day rise to become, perhaps, the greatest monarch in all of English history, Queen Elizabeth I. A queen who inherited her mother's fierce spirit, her sharp, brilliant mind, and her unyielding, unbreakable resilience. In the end, through her daughter, Anne Boleyn won. Let us leave the cold stones of the Tower of London and the tragic, ambitious queen who lost her head but won a legacy. We travel once more. Our journey takes us across the wide, dark, rolling expanse of the Atlantic Ocean and forward in time to the early 1770s. We find ourselves in a new world, the American colonies. This is a world that simmered, like a pot left too long over a roaring fire. The relationship with Great Britain, the mother country as it was called, had soured. It had curdled into something bitter, something resentful, a feeling of suspicion, and a growing, quiet fury. This had not happened overnight. It was not one single event. It had been building, drop by drop, for more than a decade. It began with things like the Stamp Act, a law passed in London that enraged the colonists by placing a direct tax on everything, from newspapers and legal documents to playing cards. It was followed by other laws, like the Townshend Acts, which taxed essentials, paper, glass, paint, and tea. Each new law was passed thousands of miles away, in a British Parliament in which the colonists had absolutely no voice, no representation. This was the heart of the matter, the core of the anger. It was a phrase that was beginning to be whispered, then spoken, then shouted in every tavern, in every meeting house, in every colonial port. No taxation without representation. At first, the anger had shown itself in polite, formal petitions sent to the king. It showed itself in fiery, passionate pamphlets printed and passed from hand to hand. Merchants, the lifeblood of the colonies, organized boycotts, refusing to buy or sell British goods. But as time wore on, as months turned into years, a darker, deeper realization set in. Britain was not listening. Worse, Britain did not seem to care. It is important to understand, truly understand, that this was never, ever really about the money. The taxes themselves were often quite small. A few pennies here, a few pennies there. What infuriated the colonists, what drove them to a point of quiet, burning rage, was the principle. They were being taxed without their consent. They were being treated not as full, equal citizens of the British Empire with all the rights of Englishmen, but as subjects, as distant, profitable possessions to be ruled and managed rather than as partners. The city of Boston, more than any other, became the beating, fiery heart of this growing resistance. Groups like the Sons of Liberty, a secretive, passionate, and bold group of patriots, grew louder and more organized. In 1770, tensions had already exploded into violence. British soldiers, redcoats, had fired on unarmed, taunting civilians in what was immediately named the Boston Massacre. Blood had already stained the cobblestones. Trust was a thing of the past. By 1773, the colonies were teetering. They were balanced on the very edge of open, organized defiance. All they needed, all it would take, was one final push, one last insult. And that final insult came not in the form of soldiers or new laws or armies. It came in the quiet, seemingly harmless, and fragrant shape of crates stacked with tea. In the year 1773, the British Parliament, sitting thousands of miles away in London, made a critical and, as history would prove, a fatal miscalculation. They were, at the time, dealing with two very large problems. Problem number one, the powerful British East India Company, a massive global corporation, was in deep financial trouble. It had warehouses in London that were bursting, overflowing with millions of pounds of unsold surplus tea. The American colonies were still stubbornly, defiantly refusing to pay the small, symbolic, but deeply hated tax on tea. They were, instead, smuggling in cheaper, tax-free tea from the Dutch. So Parliament, and what it thought was a moment of pure political brilliance, devised a solution to solve both problems at once. The solution was called the Tea Act of 1773. On paper, it looked like a fantastic deal for the American colonist. The Tea Act allowed the struggling East India Company to sell its tea directly to the colonies for the first time ever. It cut out all the middlemen, all the merchants in London, all the local wholesalers. This would, in turn, slash the price of the tea. It offered a luxury, high-quality product at a bargain. It would be cheaper than the smuggled Dutch tea. What, Parliament wondered, could possibly go wrong? The answer was everything. Because, as always, the problem was not the price of the tea. The problem was the principle behind it. The Tea Act, very cleverly and very deliberately, did one thing. It left the small, hated, symbolic tax on tea firmly in place. The colonists, who were not fools, saw this immediately. They saw it for exactly what it was. It was a trap. It was a trap disguised as a bargain. Parliament believed, in its arrogance, that the colonists, being simple money-grubbing merchants, could not resist cheap tea. They believed the colonists would finally give in and buy the tea. And the very moment, they paid for that cheap tea, they would also, by default, be paying the tax. They would be accepting Parliament's right to tax them without their consent. To many Americans, that was unthinkable. It would be a total, humiliating surrender. It would mean that their entire decade-long fight for their liberties had all been for nothing. The news of the Tea Act spread like wildfire. Merchants, the local businessmen, were furious. They saw their livelihoods threatened by a giant government-backed monopoly that would crush their local trade. Patriots, men like Samuel Adams, raged at the hidden, condescending, insulting message that the crown, the king, still believed it could buy their obedience for just a few pennies cheaper. In Boston, the reaction was especially and immediately fierce. Refusing this tea, all of this tea, became a matter of honor. It became a litmus test for your loyalty to the cause of liberty. Groups like the Sons of Liberty vowed, in public, that not one single chest of this East India Company tea would be unloaded, would be sold, or would be drunk on American soil. In other colonial ports, like New York and Charleston, they were successful. Ships carrying the controversial tea were met by angry, organized crowds and were simply turned away, forced to sail back to England. But in Boston, fate and a very, very stubborn royal governor would twist things differently. As the British tea ships, their sails furled, their anchors dropped, sat stubbornly in Boston Harbor, the city itself transformed. It became a powder keg. Every single day that passed, every hour, without a resolution, tightened the tension in the city to a breaking point. This was not a quiet protest anymore. Boston was not just resisting, it was preparing for a confrontation. In the taverns, in the churches, on the public squares, angry, anxious colonists gathered to debate, to argue, and to plan. What was to be done? The Sons of Liberty, led by the fiery, uncompromising voice of Samuel Adams and the wealthy, influential merchant John Hancock, moved swiftly to organize the resistance. The Old South Meeting House, the largest building in the city, became the nerve center of the rebellion. Thousands of people, farmers, artisans, blacksmiths, merchants, and laborers, crammed into the cold wooden hall. They filled every pew, every aisle. They spilled out into the streets, their breath fogging in the cold December air, all straining to hear the defiant, passionate speeches echoing from within. But while the people of Boston stood united, a clock was ticking, a legal and unavoidable clock. Customs law was very clear. It demanded that imported goods, like tea, had to be unloaded and the tax paid within 20 days of a ship's arrival. If that 20-day deadline passed, the customs officials, the king's men, had the legal right to seize the cargo by force. They would unload it themselves under the protection of British soldiers, and the tax would be collected. The first of the 3 ships, the Dartmouth, had arrived. Its 20-day clock was ticking down. The colonists were in a trap. They refused to let the ship's crew unload the tea. But the royal governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, refused to let the ships leave. Hutchinson was a staunch, unbending loyalist. He believed in the rule of law, and he would not be intimidated by a mob. The owners of the ships, in a panic, begged the governor. "Please," they said, "just give us the papers. Let us sail away. We will take the tea back to England." Governor Hutchinson refused. He would not back down. To him, backing down meant admitting that the mobs and not the king ruled the colonies. The deadline for the first ship, the Dartmouth, was December 17th. The city, the entire colony, held its breath. The Sons of Liberty understood with perfect, cold clarity that once that tax was paid, even if it was paid by force under protest, the principle would be lost. Their entire stand, their entire fight would be for nothing. The tension was unbearable. Everyone knew, you could feel it in the air, that something was about to break. A decision was quietly taking shape in the back rooms of the taverns, in the hushed whispers of the Sons of Liberty. a plan that would echo across an ocean and shake an empire to its very foundations. December 16th, 1773. The day dawned gray, cold, and damp over Boston. This was it, the final day. The 20-day deadline was set to expire at midnight. Thousands of colonists, some having walked for miles through the icy, muddy countryside, packed into the Old South Meeting House one last desperate time. The hall was so full, so overflowing, that men spilled out into the streets, straining to hear the fiery, anxious speeches. They made one last, formal, desperate attempt. They sent a rider, a young man named Francis Roch, who was one of the ship's owners, to the governor's mansion, miles outside the city. His mission: to plead one final time with Governor Thomas Hutchinson, to beg him to relent, to beg him to let the ships and their hated cargo simply sail away. The crowd, thousands strong, waited. They waited all afternoon in the growing cold darkness. The tension was a physical thing. Finally, as night fell, the rider returned. He made his way through the packed, silent crowd. He brought grim, final news. Governor Thomas Hutchinson remained unmoved. He would not be bullied. His answer was no. The ships would not be allowed to leave. The tea would be unloaded. The tax would be collected. The king's law would be enforced. A furious, low buzz filled the meeting house. And then Samuel Adams, the iron voice of the rebellion, stood up. He stood calmly in the flickering candlelight, and he spoke the simple, coded words that signaled the end of all debate. "This meeting," he declared, his voice ringing through the hall, "can do nothing more to save the country." It was a simple sentence, but everyone knew what it meant. The time for petitions was over. The time for words was done. The time for action had come. Outside, in the dark street, a war whoop, a loud cry, cut through the gloom. It was the signal. As if from nowhere, figures began to move through the shadows of Boston. They were ordinary men, carpenters, blacksmiths, merchants, apprentices. They were cloaked in rough, dark blankets. Their faces were blackened with soot and grime. Some had adorned themselves with feathers, a crude, symbolic imitation of Mohawk warriors. This wasn't about fooling anyone. They knew they didn't look like real Mohawks. Their disguise was a symbol. It was an act of theater. It was a way of shedding their old civilized identities as British subjects and taking a stand as something new, something wild, something fierce, something American. By the dozens, then by the hundreds, they moved, not wildly, but with a quiet, determined purpose, to Griffin's Wharf. There, the three ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, lay anchored, their dark, silent shapes outlined against the cold water. There was no shouting. There was no drunken chaos. This was not a riot. It was a mission. It was a political protest carried out with a cold, calm, ruthless precision. Armed with hatchets and axes, the disguised colonists swarmed onto the ships. They overwhelmed the few crew members who offered no resistance. Then they began their work. The sound, the sharp, splitting, splintering sound of hatchets cracking open the heavy wooden chests filled the cold night air. The sharp, fragrant smell of dry, expensive tea spilled out, mixing with the salt of the sea. Others heaved the heavy, broken crates up and over the side, their heavy splashes, thump, splash, echoing across the still, dark waters of the harbor. Chest after chest after chest. In total, 342. Thousands of pounds, a fortune's worth of tea. Crowds watched from the wharf in near total silence. British soldiers stationed nearby made no move to intervene. The discipline was extraordinary. No one stole any of the tea. No one raided the ships for any other cargo. Only the tea, the hated, symbolic tea, was targeted and destroyed. When it was over, hours later, the harbor swirled with tons of ruined leaves. As quickly as they had appeared, the men vanished back into the night, melting into the alleys and back streets of Boston. They left behind no names, no leaders, only the unmistakable, indelible mark of revolution. When word of the Boston Tea Party, this act of organized, defiant, and mocking destruction, crossed the Atlantic and reached London, the reaction was not one of consideration. It was not one of reflection. It was one of swift, cold, and absolute fury. To the British officials, to the members of Parliament, and to King George III himself, this was not a protest. This was rebellion. This was an open, arrogant, and intolerable challenge to royal authority, a challenge to the very right of Britain to govern its colonies. And it could not, it would not be ignored. Parliament, already frustrated beyond all patience by years of colonial disobedience, exploded in outrage. They demanded punishment. Not just for the men who had destroyed the tea, they would never be identified, but for the entire city of Boston. They would make an example of Boston, a terrible, public example, a warning to all the other watching American colonies. The result was a series C of laws, a series of punitive, crushing laws, so harsh, so severe, that the colonists immediately nicknamed them the Intolerable Acts. The first and most brutal blow was the Boston Port Act. In one single, simple, brutal stroke, Parliament ordered the complete, total, and immediate closure of Boston's bustling harbor. The city's economic lifeline was cut. No ships could enter, no ships could leave, no goods, no food, no firewood, no trade. The once noisy, vibrant, thriving docks fell eerily, terribly still. The port would remain closed, Parliament declared, until the destroyed tea, every last leaf, was paid for in full. But the punishment did not stop there. The Massachusetts Government Act ripped away the colony's long-held, cherished rights to self-governance. Their elected assembly was dissolved. Town meetings, the very heart of their democracy, were banned. The colony was placed firmly and directly under the king's appointed military governor. The Quartering Act forced the citizens of Boston to house, in their own homes, in their own inns and taverns, the very British soldiers who were there to subdue them. The message from Britain was clear and simple. Rebellion will be crushed. Liberty is a privilege, not a right. And we are in charge. But Parliament's heavy, clumsy hand had a profound and completely unintended effect. Instead of frightening the other 12 colonies into submission, it outraged them. News of Boston's suffering, its ports strangled, its people slowly beginning to starve, its government dissolved, its streets patrolled by redcoats, stirred a deep, profound sympathy and a righteous, burning anger throughout America. From Virginia to Pennsylvania, from South Carolina to New York, wagons filled with food, with grain, with supplies, and with money began to pour into Boston. What had once been a Massachusetts problem was now suddenly an American problem. In punishing Boston, Britain had hoped to make an example of them. Instead, they had made Boston a martyr. They had made Boston a symbol. And so, in September of 1774, something unprecedented and revolutionary happened. The First Continental Congress. For the very first time, representatives, delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies gathered under one roof in Philadelphia. They gathered to discuss a unified American response to Britain's aggression. In bringing the hammer down on Boston, Britain hadn't crushed a rebellion. It had welded 13 bickering, separate colonies into one. The age of protest was over. The age of revolution was about to begin. Let us leave the charged electric air of colonial Boston. Let the smell of salt and ruined tea and the looming shadow of a coming war fade from our minds. Our journey now takes one final and most profound leap. We travel back, not by hundreds of years, but by thousands. We drift back, past the birth of the Roman Empire, past the golden age of classical Greece. We go back before the first massive stones of Stonehenge were raised on the English plain. We go back to the very dawn of human civilization, to the same time that the first towering pyramids of Giza were rising from the Egyptian sands. We find ourselves in the dry, arid, dusty valleys of coastal Peru. Here, a city rose, a city of immense pyramids, of sprawling plazas, of complex, organized life. It rose in silent, impossible majesty, nearly 5,000 years ago. It thrived for 1,000 years, and then it faded. It faded into complete and total oblivion. It was swallowed by the sands of the desert and utterly, completely forgotten by history. For 4 millennia, the world did not even know it existed. Its name is Carroll. The Soup Valley, where Corral once thrived, seems, at first glance, an unlikely, even impossible place for a great civilization to bloom. The landscape is parched. It is barren. It is a desert, a world of rock and sand and dust. For thousands of years, travelers, shepherds, and explorers would stumble across a series of strange, large, weathered mounds scattered across the valley floor. They mistook them for natural formations, just large hills sculpted by the desert winds and the erosion of time. No one imagined that beneath those sleepy, sandy hills, lay the bones of one of the oldest cities in the world. It wasn't until the late 20th century, really beginning in the 1990s, that a determined Peruvian archaeologist, Dr. Ruth Shady, began to investigate. Driven by a curiosity, a hunch that these hills were something more, something artificial, her team began the slow, patient, painstaking work of brushing away the sand, layer by layer. And the truth, the unbelievable truth, emerged. Beneath the sand were not hills. There were walls, walls of carefully cut and intentionally placed stone. There were grand, wide staircases. There were deep, sunken, perfectly circular plazas. And there were the sloping, terraced sides of massive, towering pyramids. It was a city, a vast, complex, and clearly planned city, sprawling over 150 acres. Radiocarbon dating confirmed the unbelievable. The city of Caral was over 4,600 years old. It was thriving at the exact same time as the earliest civilizations in Mesopotamia and Egypt. This discovery, this resurrection, rewrote the story of the Americas. Before Caral, scholars believed that complex, monumental civilization in the New World developed much, much later. Caral changed everything. It proved that monumental architecture, that complex urban life, that sophisticated social organization had been born here in the Americas independently and at the same ancient time as the great legendary empires of the Old World. After 4,000 years of silence, the stones of this forgotten magical city were finally speaking again. At first glance, as we have said, the Supe Valley looks like a place where life should struggle. The sun beats down mercilessly. The landscape is a harsh, cracked, brittle canvas of sand and stone. Water is scarce. But the ancient people of Caral, they saw something different. They did not see a desert to be feared. They saw a canvas to be shaped. And their success, their ability to build a thriving metropolis in this place, was built on two things: brilliant, patient ingenuity and social cooperation. Their first and most important victory was over the water. They learned to read the land. They learned to tame the river's seasonal floods. They built simple but brilliant irrigation systems, small stone-lined canals that channeled the precious, life-giving water across the dry valley floor. Where others saw only dust, the people of Caral coaxed green, vibrant shoots of life. They grew beans, they grew squash, they grew guava and sweet potatoes. But their treasure, their white gold, their most important strategic crop was cotton. This soft, durable, high-quality cotton became the engine of their entire economy. They spun this cotton into strong, fine threads. And from these threads, they wove not blankets, not clothes, but fishing nets. They then traded these expertly made, high-quality fishing nets with the villages and settlements down on the Pacific coast just a few miles away. And the coastal people who lived by the sea but could not grow cotton paid them. They paid them with the one crucial resource the inland desert could not provide: dried fish and shellfish. This was a massive, reliable, unending source of protein. This simple, brilliant, symbiotic trade, inland cotton for coastal fish, fueled the rise of coral.
It was the economic engine that allowed, for the first time, a complex, dense urban society to bloom and to be sustained in this otherwise unforgiving, inhospitable land.
They were not isolated. They were connected. Coral was the hub, the center of a vast, peaceful trade network that stretched up and down the coast and deep into the Andes Mountains. They did not conquer the desert with brute force. They did not fight it. They partnered with it. They built their homes from stone and earth, designed to stay cool in the heat. They studied the stars and the seasons, planning their harvests with the precision of master astronomers. They worked with nature, not against it. And against all odds, in this barren, forgotten valley, they built a thriving, complex, and extraordinary oasis of life. Rising out of the desert floor, like ancient sleeping guardians, like man-made mountains, the pyramids of Coral defy everything we thought we knew about the ancient Americas. These were not small, crude, primitive structures. They were massive. They were deliberate. They were works of ambitious, sophisticated architecture, created by a people with vision, organization, and a deep understanding of engineering. The centerpiece of the city, the largest of its 6 great pyramids, is the Pirámide Mayor, the Great Pyramid. It stretches more than 450 feet in length, the size of 4 football fields, and it towers nearly 60 feet, 6 stories above the desert floor. It is a feat of engineering on par with the early legendary wonders of the ancient world. And they achieved this, we must remember, without the invention of the wheel, without metal tools, without horses or oxen or any beasts of burden. So, how? How did they build them? Their engineering was as ingenious as their agriculture. They built using heavy stones, yes, but the core of their pyramids, the fill, was made of something else. Workers would gather reeds from the riverbank and weave them into ingenious mesh-like bags. These bags, which archaeologists call shikras, would be filled with heavy stones and rubble. Then these shikras, these rock-filled bags, would be stacked layer upon layer to create the massive, stable interior of the pyramids. This shikra construction was a work of pure, intuitive, unwritten brilliance. Because Coral, as we've noted, lies in a region that is prone to violent, powerful earthquakes. These flexible, rock-filled bags packed inside the pyramids acted as seismic shock absorbers. When the earth shook, the entire massive monument could shift and wobble and dissipate the seismic energy, rather than cracking and breaking and collapsing. They had mastered 5,000 years ago earthquake-resistant architecture. But even more profound than how they built was why they built. Unlike the great, famous pyramids of Giza in Egypt, the pyramids of Coral were not tombs. They were not sealed, dark monuments built to honor a single dead ruler. They were the opposite. They were open. They were public. They were centers of ceremony, of power, and of public communal life. Broad, elegant staircases led up to wide, flat temples and gathering spaces on their summits. This is where rituals were held, where fires burned beneath the endless starry Peruvian sky. And at the foot of these great pyramids, vast, sunken, perfectly circular plazas were built, dug deep into the earth. These acted as ancient natural amphitheaters, drawing thousands of people together, focusing their sound and their sight on the rituals performed at the center. The entire city, its very layout, was designed to bring people together. It was a society that prized community and order, a people deeply spiritually connected to one another and to the cosmos. As archaeologists, led by Ruth Shady, carefully, painstakingly uncovered Corral, as they brushed away the sands of millennia, they began to notice something. Or rather, they began to notice a profound, a stunning lack of something. Among all the ruins of this vast, complex, 5,000-year-old city, something is completely and totally missing. No weapons have been found. No spearheads, no arrowheads, no war clubs, no shields. Furthermore, the city, this vast, wealthy urban center, has no defensive walls. There are no fortifications, no battlements, no watchtowers, no dry moats, no sign of any kind of a military stronghold. There are no mass graves hinting at bloody conquest or internal strife. There are no murals, no carvings depicting warriors or battles or bound prisoners, scenes so common in other ancient civilizations. The conclusion, based on all the evidence, is as stunning as it is simple. Corral was a society built on peace. For 1,000 years, an entire millennium, it rose and it flourished, not through violence, not through conquest, not through fear, but through cooperation, through trade, and through a shared, unifying spiritual belief. The people of Corral seem to have invested all their surplus energy, all their communal effort, not in armies, not in defense, but in architecture, in astronomy, in community, and in music. Their pyramids were not monuments to a military victory. They were centers of celebration, of worship, and of governance. This was a civilization that chose to gather rather than to conquer, to negotiate rather than to destroy. And instead of weapons, archaeologists found something else entirely. Something that speaks directly to the very soul of this ancient, gentle people. Buried in the dry, protected ruins of the temples, they uncovered a treasure trove. They found 32 flutes, exquisitely, beautifully carved from the hollow bones of condors and of pelicans. They found whistles, crafted from deer antlers. They found small, simple drums stretched with animal hides. These were not simple toys. They were crafted with care. They were tuned to specific musical notes. They were designed to carry sound, a high, keening, beautiful sound across the wide, sunken plazas. In a world that had not yet invented written language, music spoke the language of the soul. Imagine it. Imagine standing in the twilight in that high desert valley, the low, soft thrum of drums rising at dusk, the high, pure, haunting sound of the bone flutes echoing off the great stone pyramids. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of people gathered in the plazas, their faces lit by the glow of ceremonial fires, all united, not by a king's command, not by the fear of a spear, but by sound, by harmony, by a shared reverent connection to the cosmos. This was the power that held Corral together. Not the sword, but the song. For 1,000 years, from roughly 3000 BC to 1800 BC, the city of Corral flourished. It was a beacon, a humming, vibrant, peaceful beacon of music, of trade, of engineering, and of harmony in the high desert sands. And then, almost without a trace, it was abandoned. Its end is as mysterious as its beginning. No fires mark its fall. No layers of ash and charcoal. No signs of conquest or invasion scar its walls. No skeletons with violent wounds. No shattered, toppled monuments. It was not destroyed. Instead, Corral just faded. Its grand plazas emptied. Its pyramids were left to the wind and the drifting sands. The flutes and the drums were silenced. Why? Why did they leave? That question, that profound, simple question, still lingers like a ghost across the silent, empty Soup Valley. We can only follow the clues. Scholars, including Ruth Shady herself, believe that profound and unstoppable environmental change likely struck the final fatal blow. Evidence from ice cores and lake beds suggests that a long, severe, multi-decade period of climate change, a deep, relentless drought, may have crippled Corral's delicate and essential agricultural system. The river, their fragile, precious, life-giving river, may have shrunk. It may have become just a trickle. The irrigation channels, their work of brilliance, would have run dry. The cotton fields, the white gold that was the very engine of their entire economy, would have withered and turned to dust. The vital, symbiotic trade network, built entirely on that surplus of cotton, would have collapsed. The careful, perfect, delicate balance that the people of Corral had maintained with their harsh desert environment, the very key to their 1,000-year success, may have finally and irrevocably tipped beyond repair. The departure seems to have been gradual, not sudden. It was not a panicked, terrified flight from a conquering army. It was, perhaps, a slow, sad, and reluctant realization. The land could no longer support them. The gods were silent. Families likely drifted away, one by one, seeking more fertile valleys, seeking stronger rivers, seeking new, easier beginnings. Children who had once run and played across Corral's grand sunken plazas grew up telling stories to their own children, stories of a magnificent, giant stone city that their grandparents had left behind. Stories that would eventually fade into legend, and then fade into silence. The desert reclaimed what the people had built. The wind, the endless, patient wind, carried fine yellow sand over the stone temples and buried the empty plazas. What had once been a humming, vibrant, living civilization became a field of silent, sleeping, forgotten mounds. For nearly 4,000 years, Corral remained hidden, a whisper beneath the sands, waiting. Tonight, we have traveled far. Our long, slow journey together is coming to an end. We have felt the biting, invasive cold of a medieval winter. We huddled for warmth in a smoky, dark hut, our survival and the survival of our family hanging on a single, fragile, banked ember. We have walked the cold, stone, whispering halls of the Tudor court. We bore witness to the fiery, brilliant rise and the quiet, tragic fall of a queen who changed a kingdom, all for the sake of ambition and love. We have stood on a dark, cold, moonlit wharf in Boston. We heard the sharp, sudden crack of hatchets and the heavy, quiet splashes of defiance as a few determined people chose a principle over peace. And we have drifted at last back and back to the silent, sun-baked plazas of Corral. We stood in awe of a city built on harmony, engineered for endurance, and ruled not by the spear, but by the song. From the nameless, shivering peasant to the ambitious, doomed queen, from the defiant, disguised colonist to the ancient, peaceful pyramid builder. A single golden thread connects them all. It is a thread of raw, stubborn human ingenuity, a thread of unbreakable, quiet endurance. They all faced worlds of profound and daily uncertainty. They faced the struggle of the cold, the danger of the court, the tyranny of an empire, and the slow, creeping death of the desert. And they adapted. They fought back. They endured. Their stories, which were once so loud, so urgent, so filled with cold and fear and passion, are now quiet. Their struggles are long, long over. Their urgency has faded. Their legacy is simply the world we now inhabit. And as you lie here now, in your own bed, in your own warm, safe, and comfortable room, you can feel the profound and gentle contrast. The battles of the past have given way to the peace of this present moment. The endless, freezing, anxious night of the peasant has given way to your own comfortable, restorative darkness. Their stories are told. Their day is done. You can let them go now. You can let the details fade. Let the names, Anne, Henry, Samuel, let them drift away. Let the places, the hut, the tower, the harbor, the desert, let them dissolve like so much sand, like so much smoke, like so much tea on a dark, quiet harbor. There is nothing left to do. Nothing but to rest. Thank you for listening. Good night.